Gráinne O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. A fearless buccaneer. A heroine who defied every convention of her time. A legend erased from the pages of Irish history. The name of Gráinne O'Malley, the 16th century pirate queen, is famous throughout Ireland, and yet according to Irish history, she did not exist. As it has been passed down, the legend tells of a young girl anxious to go to sea, who took herself off to the high cliffs of the west coast. Here she cut off her hair to look like a boy. When she returned home, her sea captain father declared that this was a true O'Malley, fit to learn the ways of the sea. And for her impudence, he called her Gráinne Mhaol, in Irish, the Bald One. By the age of 16, Grace had become a beautiful woman, a skillful mariner, and a leader of great cunning. Her first marriage to a warrior leader, Donal O'Flaherty, forged a powerful alliance for the O'Malley clan. Soon, she would bear 3 children. Grace now controlled the O'Flaherty castle, here in the west of Ireland. From here, it is said, at the helm of her own galley, she embarked on a life of piracy. At sea, she raided wealthy merchant ships. On land, she defied the colonial laws of the English, who occupied and controlled Ireland at that time. But even as Grace and her family prospered, a bitter feud was about to take its toll. One day, while he was hunting near his home, assassins from a rival clan ambushed and killed Grace's husband. The killers then looked to Grace's castle, intending to seize it for themselves. But they hadn't reckoned on the fighting spirit of the pirate queen. As the story goes, Grace defended her clan's fortress with such ferocity that she quickly defeated the attackers. Those who managed to escape fled in terror, never to return. And from that day forth, the island fortress was renamed Hen's Castle, in honor of its formidable mistress. In time, Grace remarried. Her second husband, Richard Burke, was a notorious Irish rebel, and while he fought the English on land, Grace continued her life at sea, where she gave birth to her 4th child, Tibbet na Lung, Toby of the ships. Even as Grace nursed her newborn son below decks, a notorious band of Turkish pirates laid siege to her galley, overwhelming her crew. Grace leapt to her feet, and with a defiant yell, she stormed into battle. Suddenly, the tables were turned. In minutes, the pirate queen and her men had slaughtered the entire Turkish crew and set their ship adrift. After 1 year of marriage, Grace had everything she wanted from her new husband: the loyalty of his clan and the control of his stout fortress. One day, it is said, as he returned from yet another skirmish with the English, he found the gates were locked against him. Looking up, he saw why. High on the battlements stood Grace. With a wave of her hand, she announced, "I dismiss you." According to ancient Irish law, she was now divorced, and as a parting blow, she declared the castle now belonged to her. Legend tells us that Grace O'Malley lived a double life. On land, she would pretend to submit to the colonial laws of the English, even swearing her allegiance to the crown. But at sea, she defied them. She raided cargo from their wealthy merchant ships. She extracted tolls in exchange for safe passage. And she scoured the treacherous seacoast, looting any shipwreck she found. Finally, a rival chieftain betrayed Grace to the English, and for months she languished in Dublin Castle on a charge of piracy. An offence punishable by death. But somehow, even in the face of execution, Grace prevailed. Whether by bribery or by seducing her prison guard, she escaped the hangman's noose and returned to her beloved home on the West Coast. Even as Grace rejoiced in her freedom, a new threat was looming. The Queen of England had appointed a sadistic new governor to the west of Ireland, Sir Richard Bingham, a man consumed by hate for the pirate queen and determined to end her reign at any cost. By the late 16th century, England controlled most of Ireland. The last hope for the Irish was an alliance with England's arch-enemy, Spain. In the summer of 1588, the Spanish king, Philip II, sent the Armada, a massive fleet of warships, to destroy the Royal Navy. But the fleet was doomed. Storms and high seas battered the Armada as it traveled north. Finally, the English Navy outmaneuvered and destroyed it. Many of the crippled galleons ran aground on the west coast of Ireland. Fearing rebellion, Governor Bingham forbade any contact between the Irish and the Spanish survivors, on pain of death. Even in these dark times, Grace's defiance knew no bounds. When a Spanish galleon was dashed to pieces near her castle, it said she secretly rescued one of the survivors. Risking a charge of high treason, she smuggled him to safety, saving him from almost certain death. Soon afterwards, Grace and the fugitive became lovers. Their joy, however, was short-lived. During this time, Governor Bingham was building up the evidence he needed to hang Grace. He used every means to tempt her into open rebellion. He imposed harsh taxes. His troops raided her land. Finally, he arranged the murder of her new lover and one of her sons. But still, Grace's legendary courage won out. In a stroke of defiant genius, she went over Bingham's head and appealed directly to his supreme commander, Elizabeth I, Queen of England. No other Irish chieftain would have dared meet face to face with the English queen. But without hesitation, legend has it, Grace set sail for London, the heart of the very empire which had dispossessed her people. Ireland's pirate queen would confront England's virgin queen. Arriving at Elizabeth's castle in London, it said that Grace stalked barefoot into court, wearing the ceremonial dress of an Irish chieftain. Behind her stood a retinue of warriors, tall as oaks, who overshadowed the demure ladies-in-waiting and courtiers of the English royal household. Grace and Elizabeth conversed for hours, one queen to another. Noticing that the foul city air of London was causing her guest to sneeze, we are told that the pale and haughty Elizabeth offered Grace her lace handkerchief. After blowing her nose, Grace threw the handkerchief into the fire, in the Irish custom. The court was shocked. A gift from the Queen of England should be shown more respect, Grace was told, and besides, the English put soiled handkerchiefs back in their pockets. Defiant as ever, Grace announced that, unlike the English, her people were civilized and would never indulge in such a disgusting practice. Despite this impudence, it's said that Grace charmed Elizabeth, who pardoned all her crimes, ordering that her wealth and territory be restored. But Grace's troubles were far from over. Back on the remote west coast of Ireland, Governor Bingham was furious. Behind Elizabeth's back, he imposed even harsher taxes and placed whole battalions of soldiers on Grace's land to ruin her. Soon, Grace and her people were impoverished. In desperation, she fled her fortress, seeking refuge with the rebels who planned to rid Ireland of the English forever. Just as Bingham had hoped, Grace had branded herself a traitor. If captured, the pirate queen would surely hang. How could her legendary courage save her now? Grace O'Malley, a powerful, defiant woman, a fearless rebel, a thorn in the side of the world's most powerful empire. According to the historians of 16th century Ireland, she was a myth. And yet, for 4 centuries, the memory of the pirate queen has lived on. Could the legend be true?
The proofs relating to the existence of Grace O'Malley are all contained in mouldy old manuscripts, 400 odd years old. Also, proof is there in terms of the remains of her castles, and perhaps most importantly of all, her 13th great-grandson, Lord Altamont in Westport House, is still alive and well and living in Ireland today.
Grace O'Malley, or Gráinne Mhaol as she was sometimes known in Ireland, was my 13th great-grandmother, and she was married to Richard Burke. We're very proud of the fact, really, that we are descended from this remarkable woman who lived in the 16th century, and it was a very male-orientated century. It was a century of adventure when men were going all over the world and making discoveries. It was very unusual in those days to find a woman who led thousands of men in this very strong way.
The 16th century was a bleak chapter in the history of Ireland. Since 1515, most of the island had come under the control of England, and the colonial stranglehold tightened year by year. On the rugged west coast, the last bastion of the native Irish, a ruthless mission was underway. Its aim, to destroy all trace of Irish culture. In time, even the Irish language would be outlawed. Resistance of any kind was met with brutal force. This was no place for rebels. And yet, the figure of Grace O'Malley dates from this same time. Here was the leader of a powerful tribal alliance, a mistress of many castles, a pirate queen and a law unto herself, a woman who, according to the conventions of her time and the annals of Irish history, should never have existed.
She was daring, fearless in adversity. She was the most shrewd and able and tactician and politician. She was a mother, a lover, a wife twice over. She led a private army by land and sea for the space of 60 years, but unlike other women leaders of her time before and after, was physically involved and led from the front. And I think the great tribute to her is that the men of the period were prepared and agreeable to be led by her by land and sea. It is quite extraordinary and perhaps in some way quite unexplainable.
To this day, Galway, the capital of the west of Ireland, is called the City of the Tribes. And inscribed on the gates of the old walled city, a 16th century English inscription reads,
"From the ferocious O'Flahertys, good Lord deliver us."
This was the clan of Donal O'Flaherty, Grace's first husband, which was allied with the O'Malleys under her leadership. Many of the O'Flaherty fortresses still stand, even the legendary Hen's Castle, named in Grace's honour. But despite even this, the Pirate Queen has no place in Irish history. The chief historical records of Ireland, dating from the 16th century, are known as the Annals of the Four Masters. Among their pages, they list the names Donald O'Flaherty and Richard Burke, Grace's first two husbands. Their family histories, their rebellious exploits, even their deaths are related in minute detail. But Grace O'Malley's name never appears. Had it not been for the meticulous records of the English, the legend of the Pirate Queen would have ended here. One of the many documents that have survived from the court of Queen Elizabeth relates to an unusual incident. In a report dating from 1577, Lord Deputy Sir Henry Sidney, the Queen's representative in Ireland, recounts a meeting with
a most famous feminine sea captain, the most notorious woman in all the coasts of Ireland.
He even records her name, Gráinne Mhaol, in English, Grace O'Malley. Thanks to this evidence, we can be certain that the historical figure of the Pirate Queen is no myth. But still the mystery remains. Why was Grace O'Malley erased from the history of her own country? The events which surround the figure of Grace O'Malley are among the most significant of the 16th century. It was the time of Elizabeth I, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the English colonization of Ireland. We can be absolutely certain of every detail. According to English history, the Pirate Queen certainly existed, but in Irish records she is never mentioned. Why?
Perhaps to some extent, down through the years, because she was a woman in past times, she wasn't written up. She was down here in the west of Ireland, I think, as well. And the west of Ireland in the 16th century, I think, was very far west. I mean, it's only in recent years, really, that the west of Ireland has come quite so near to the rest of the world, in fact. So therefore, I think she was very far away from everywhere.
Of one thing we can be sure. The male historians of 16th century Ireland had every reason to resent Grace O'Malley. Not only did she violate Irish law by claiming the property of both her husbands, she was a powerful, independent woman in a man's world. Perhaps during the 16th century, Ireland was unwilling to admit that one of its greatest heroes was a woman. Despite Grace's absence from Irish history, the figure of Bingham, her arch-enemy, is well documented. We know that one Richard Bingham was appointed governor of Connacht, Grace's own province, in 1584. His mission was to subdue all resistance by the native Irish and to confiscate the land of all dissenters, to rule with an iron fist. Bingham's personal vendetta against the Pirate Queen knew no bounds. He imposed the most crippling of taxes. His troops harassed her people. And finally, he even arranged the kidnap of her beloved son. For the first time in her life, Grace was helpless.
Governor Bingham had got the better offer in Connacht, and perhaps was the only man in her life who actually ever did get the better offer. So she decided to go above his head and go to his boss, who happened to be Queen Elizabeth I in England. But before she actually met the Queen, she had to go through certain formalities, as anybody would today who wished to see a head of state, and certainly somebody as powerful as the Queen of England. Firstly, she would send to the Queen 5 petitions, so she actually bombarded the Queen with notices of her sad happenings that were happening to her in Connacht at the hands of Queen Elizabeth's governors there. Then she went on the last epic voyage of her long career, sailed up the Thames and hung about the court for the summer of 1593. Now, she did have a friend in court, Black Tom, Earl of Ormond, who happened to be a cousin of Queen Elizabeth, and he dropped a little note to the Queen's secretary. He, in turn, sent 18 articles of interrogatory to Grace O'Malley. And when she had answered these set of 18 questions, then Queen Elizabeth was ready to see her.
Now Grace had what she wanted. a chance to confront Bingham's supreme commander, the most powerful monarch of the 16th century world. And yet, Grace was an outlaw, the most notorious pirate of her day. What could she have hoped to gain here, alone in the heartland of her enemies? Justice or betrayal? Of all Grace O'Malley's notorious deeds, one stands out from all the rest. It is the most spectacular and most improbable exploit of her legendary career. As the story goes, it was her last great voyage, her confrontation with Queen Elizabeth I. Grace, after all, was a convicted enemy of the English crown, a pirate who had plundered the Queen's navy. As an Irish clan leader, Grace would have had little, if any, knowledge of English. She was a stranger in an unknown land. How could she have pleaded her case in the language of her enemies? We can only assume that the pirate queen enlisted the help of a translator, because, according to the records of Elizabeth's court, a remarkable document arrived in the summer of 1593. The language is described as being so eloquent, the appeal so well phrased, that Elizabeth granted an audience almost immediately. Legend relates that the pirate queen arrived in Elizabeth's court barefoot, resplendent in the ceremonial robes of an Irish chieftain and surrounded by a guard of tall Irish warriors. But it is likely that Grace was dressed far more modestly and accompanied only by her translator. The insolent burning of Elizabeth's handkerchief may also be closer to legend than fact. Some claim it symbolizes Grace's refusal of a royal title from Elizabeth, claiming, no doubt, that she was a queen already. The truth of the episode, though, remains a mystery. To this day, no written record of it has ever been found.
Grace O'Malley definitely met with the Queen. During my research, I came across the letter that Queen Elizabeth actually had written relating to the audience which she had with Grace O'Malley in about July 1593. And that letter is very important for many respects. Firstly, it shows what a shrewd negotiator Grace O'Malley was, because contrary to the wishes of the Queen's governors in Ireland, Grace O'Malley actually got everything she asked from the Queen.
Grace returned from London with her freedom, a heroine to her people. Her son was released, her lands restored. By rights, the rest of her life should have been spent in peace and safety. But despite her royal pardon, Richard Bingham secretly defied his queen, bringing all his powers to bear on the now defenseless Grace. Supported by her son, Grace lived out the rest of her days here, at the lonely castle of Rockfleet on the west coast of Ireland. The wealth and power which had once been hers were gone. Her days of piracy and defiance were over. For centuries, the exact location of Grace O'Malley's grave was unknown. Some claimed she was buried at Burrishoole, a 16th century abbey built by her second husband on the west coast. And yet, it seems likely that the body of Grace O'Malley lies closer to the place of her birth.
I think Grace's final resting place undoubtedly is in the Abbey on Clare Island, and I base my reason for saying that on the fact that I know exactly where her son, Tiboj Nalong, Toby of the Ships, is buried, and the tomb that was designed for him by his wife is almost identical to the tomb on the Abbey on Clare Island. And obviously it has to be somebody of great importance that is buried there, because it is a very ornate tomb and monument, and a suitable one to Grace O'Malley.
Legend has it that Grace died not in 1600, but in 1603, the year that saw the defeat of the Irish rebellion and the final triumph of the English, the year that marked the death of Queen Elizabeth I. It seems fitting that Grace O'Malley died with the era she fought to preserve. In truth and in legend, she was the last heroine of a proud culture. Even though this extraordinary woman was betrayed by the historians of her own time, the memory of her never faded. For 400 years it has been preserved in the poetry and the songs of Ireland. Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen, wrote herself into Irish history through the hearts and minds of her own people.